I don't know how they're going to continue to protect 45, but it's not looking likely because all the people who was in his inner circle, they are being exposed, and in just typical fashion. And again, this is not stereotypical of all white males, but when they get that pressure on them, they're gonna save their own ass. Gives a damn about how friends we were last year. It's about what's going on now.
I think adversity kind of brings out the worst or the best in many people, and I think when we kind of look at this and we see the screws that are being pressed to 45 at this point, we'll kind of see what happens. Even though personally, I don't think a damn thing will happen, and I think he'll pardon everybody. I really do, man. I don't think anything, because, and again, this kind of goes back to the whole thing. What is he doing to you? Let me back up a little bit, because I'm kind of going ahead of myself here in my mind. The reason why he has so much support right now, the reason why he got so much support, is because his ideas, his philosophies were designed to hurt others. Yeah. Oh, this is going to hurt immigrants. This is going to hurt people of color. It's going to do this. And so a lot of people, even though they know in their hearts that 45 is a terrible person and a terrible human being, they said, okay, well, nothing's going to happen to us. He's going to do it to them. And even though now you're seeing a lot of his actions, just because he's a bad businessman, and you're looking at things like the tariffs, and you're seeing what's happening to coal miners. You're looking to see what's happening at towns that depend on manufacturing. You're looking at the tariffs that are happening. And these same folks who supported him are losing their jobs, and they're losing their money. And these people who, do bad things, they're calling 911, or they're going viral because they've said racist shit all over the place. These folks are losing their money, they're losing their livelihoods, and they are still supporting 45. And we kind of look at him. My dad has talked about it too, and they said, as long as a system of white supremacy is in place, and as long as there's a feeling that you will be above others, they will continue to support a lot of this stupidity, even if stuff is happening to them. And it's very evident, that a lot of these attitudes that they have now were the same ones that they had back in the 70s when Ron Starworth joined the force. You look at how those people acted, at the Klan initiation. Some of the crazy things that they were talking about. David Duke in particular, when he was talking about, what's the best way to say it? Remember that scene where Ron Starworth took the picture with David Duke and one other person, and then at the very end, Starworth puts his arms around him while they take the picture, and David Duke kind of comes up to him and says, what the hell are you doing, boy? Something to that effect. And then Starworth basically says, man, if you assault a police officer, that's 5 years. And Duke says, and try that in Louisiana and see what happens. There's always kind of that attitude. So there are a lot of dynamics in play behind that. And the reason I kind of say all this is because nothing from then has actually changed in the present.
It has not.
A lot of those same attitudes are still in place. And
worse.
Yeah. Well, I think right now we are in an environment, we're in a society now where people are comfortable being open again. I'm actually okay with it, because I think for many years, it was always there, but people, behaved in polite society, and they didn't think, oh, okay, I'm not going to say anything about it. I'm not going to be loud about it. And now we live in an era where, people are comfortable expressing that stuff. They're comfortable calling people the N-word, or, all the other epithets that are out there for people of color. And, they're okay with immigrant children being boxed up in cages and, things like that. Just terrible human behavior, all under, the umbrella of Christianity. Now, if that's Christianity, then I don't want any part of it.
No, I'm not sure what God they're praying to and what God instructed him to do these things, but counter to the point we made earlier, when they feel like they're doing the right thing, is make people extremely dangerous at this point. So it's just one of those things where it's crazy, because we weren't alive during those times, but when you kind of look at movies like BlacKKKlansman, you like, this looks familiar, and it's just reflecting modern day society where we live in right now. So it's definitely one of those movies that if you haven't seen, definitely give it a shot. Like I said, I had no expectations when I went in to see the movie, but it puts you up on game on a lot of things, historically speaking. And like I said, Spike Lee, he put his Spike Lee twist on it. So check it out.
So let me ask you this then. So I'll flip it around a little bit. There's been some criticism of Spike Lee on this one. You know, people are saying this is a pro-cop movie. He didn't do enough to talk about the racism in law enforcement. And there's been some accusations about him, you know, taking, what was it, $200,000 for an ad campaign to support the NYPD with the idea that it's going to bridge the gap between communities, which, you know, I'm kind of looking at that as the biggest irony in the world, to be honest with you. But, you know, what would be your reaction to that? What would you say to that? We say, you know, dang, does Spike Lee sell out by doing this? I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, the reason I wouldn't take an issue with it, me personally, is because it was a movie. The movie that was, you know, a period piece was going during that time. And, you know, he wanted to put his, you know, artistry to it. Had it been a documentary, then yes, maybe it would have been a little different. But I think this movie was purely for entertainment value. Yes. So, you know, it kind of irks me when people read too much into things like that. You know, just enjoy the movie. Yeah. You know, of course, people are going to have their criticisms, their critiques and disagreements. But, you know, take it for what it's worth. It's not a documentary. It's not one of those films that, you know, is going to be played in the Selma 100-year anniversary. It's nothing like that. Right. It's just purely a film. And to your question about him taking the now is this true or is this alleged that he took the 200?
You know what? I've been trying to do research on it. Apparently it did happen, but I can't find anything that definitively says that is what happened. So I'm going to put that out there as rumor until. Now, those of you who are listening, you know, if you find out that that's a fact, you know, give us a shout out on Twitter, Instagram, tell us. Right. Yeah, but, you know, I kind of also look at it from this angle, too, because had this been a movie that was anti-cop, I don't even think the movie would have been greenlit.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Because right now, you know, despite everything that's going on, there is still an aversion to criticizing first responders and especially police, you know. Yeah. A lot of people will defend police, regardless of their actions. It doesn't matter if the stuff is on tape. Doesn't matter what happens. There are people who are so blindly pro-law enforcement that they can do no wrong, and no matter what you say or do, nothing's going to change that. And I think if Spike had been real all the way through in terms of presenting both sides of the racism, you know, not just with, you know, the Klansmen and making them look like the silly terrorist group that they are, but also addressing some of the real issues that are going on in law enforcement, this movie would have never seen the light of day. At most, you would have seen this thing go straight to video, if it got made at all.
Yeah, or it came out and had no, pretty much how they did Nat Turner's version of A Birth of a Nation. I still know a lot of people who hadn't seen the movie because of the bad press that it got. Even before the movie premiered, but it's a hell of a movie.
It is.
It is one that I think a lot of people slept on, but it's going to be an important movie for the future, if that makes sense. Yeah. And now, kind of going back to Spike Lee, I know I'm about to catch hell for this statement, but I just got to, you know, be honest. If he did take 200 or, you know, he donated 200 to the NYPD.
I think they say he took $200,000 from the NYPD, you know, as a kind of an outreach campaign, an ad outreach campaign to bridge the gap between communities of color and NYPD, which that makes me roll my eyes right out the gate because the NYPD is right there with the LAPD. Yeah. I mean, they are two of the absolute worst, and you know, any efforts to bridge the communication gap or bridge the relationship between, you know, the police department. You really can. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I think a big part of that is just related to police unions and the way that they protect their members. And I think there's a certain culture that says, even though there are a lot of good cops. So let me put that out there first and foremost. There are a lot of good cops, but the whole wall of blue, the blue silence, the blue wall, whatever it may be. I think a big part of that is the unions who actually protect, you know, all police officers, and the fact that they don't necessarily want to break that down. They don't want there to be division within those ranks.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too. And we're looking at a headline now: NYPD paid Spike Lee $200,000 for work on ad campaigns.
So that actually did happen.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And this is from the New York Post. In situations like that, and like I said, I know there's going to be a controversial statement or comment. I think too we do have a problem with police brutality as a whole, but in some communities, some people don't experience that problem. There are a lot of good cities and that have good cops or police people, as a whole. And so how you respond in your community may be different how someone responds to theirs. Someone who could live in, and I'm just throwing it out there, so if you live in these cities, it's just hypothetically speaking. Someone who lives in Washington, D.C., they may have a strong police department, a strong positive presence, versus someone who lives in Atlanta, Georgia, who everything they see is negative, and that they don't see good cops, they don't have the good dealings, they don't have the policemen who generally care or want to help. Those experiences are going to be two totally different experiences. So the people in D.C. who wants to do good and want to support their cops, they're going to get flack because, like I said, it is a nationwide problem. Believe me, I see it. But, other people who are having a negative experience are going to critique and criticize them because they're supporting that cause. And like I said, even though their communities may not have the bad seeds, so to speak, or the negative influences or things like that, it's going to depend solely on how you respond to it where you live at that particular time. Like I said, don't get me wrong, there is a nationwide problem of police brutality. But at that same time, we can't hold every single police person accountable for, those individual bad apples. And so, like I said, the experience of someone who doesn't have those issues in a different community may not respond to someone who's having all negative issues in a negative police community. So you gotta, it's one of those hard to gauges, but you can't put the proverbial measuring stick across all because it's not going to add right. And, that's just my 2 cents on that matter.
And I've had kind of a few conversations about this, and I think we've even talked about that on this show too. I said, what can help alleviate a lot of these problems here, and it kind of sparked a further discussion. And I had this conversation with a lawyer. What she was saying is that a lot of times, because of the protections that police officers enjoy, she was the one that introduced me to the concept of revoking indemnification for police officers. And the idea behind that is because, a lot of times municipalities are sued, when there's an act of brutality and, there's a settlement with the city, taxpayers are responsible for that. But that's not something that is taken out from those funds are not taken away from the individual officer. Those are paid by the city. And the idea behind revocation of indemnity is essentially making police officers individually and financially liable for instances of brutality or instances where they're sued and a judgment is rendered. And, the whole premise behind that was that white supremacy recognizes and respects only two things: violence and money. And you can't, just in terms of sheer numbers, black folks, we're not looking to be violent towards people. We're not looking to get revenge in a violent type of way. So violence is obviously out as an option. Now, financially, and being able to financially cripple those, who are, terrible officers, who treat people the wrong way, and actually invoking a financial penalty behind them, more than just them losing a job, because a lot of times these police officers who lose one job just go to another town and get another job. But if you went back and said, let's take, let's just take any officer. Let's say that, a judgment was rendered for $5 million. And guess what? It's not the city that's paying that. That individual officer is liable for that. Can you imagine that change in attitude that would happen if you bankrupted an officer basically for the rest of his life, and he had a summary judgment of $1 million or $5 million held against him, and every penny that he earned for the rest of his life would have to go back to the victim's family?
That's
You
crazy.
tell me that wouldn't change your fucking attitude.
I think it would. I definitely think it would.
And I think if you had that over their heads, that would stop a lot of that, because it's no matter what they did, they would be poor for the rest of their life. They would be rock bottom for the rest of their life. And I think it's going to take something of that magnitude in order to get people to stop, because